The Subcommittee on Energy and Minerals Resources will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the subcommittee at any time. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chairman and the ranking minority member. I ask unanimous consent that the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Amade, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. The gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. Bolbert, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. And the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Stansberry, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today, the Subcommittee on Energy and Minerals Resources will host an oversight hearing to examine and emphasize the importance of domestic mining for our nation's security. I would like to begin by thanking our witnesses for being here to discuss this important topic. By now, we all understand that hard rock minerals are essential not only to our modern life in the United States, but also to our future. Demand for these minerals is projected to skyrocket in the coming years, even outpacing anticipated global supplies in some cases. This subject is highly personal to me. I have been fighting for years to unleash the economic powerhouse of several critical mining projects across northern Minnesota. Unfortunately, the Biden administration spent the last 4 years unfairly and unilaterally blocking dozens of important mining projects, including those in my district. In fact, the Biden administration finally acted at the 11th hour last month on Perpetua's Stibnite Gold project that we will be discussing today, only after China announced a mineral export ban, forcing the Pentagon to plead with the White House to approve the project. This project should have been approved years ago, and the Biden administration's failure to do so earlier has put our country's national security at risk. Given the importance of these minerals and their existence throughout the United States, it is astonishing that we rely so heavily on imports. The U.S. Geological Survey's own figures show that the United States is forced to import more than 50% of the minerals on its critical minerals list. Wildly, we import 100% of nearly a quarter of minerals that we list as critical. Worse yet, our close allies are not the nations upon which we rely for these key commodities. Most notably, China controls approximately 60% of global critical minerals production, 90% of processing, and 75% of manufacturing. According to the International Energy Agency's 2024 Global Critical Minerals Outlook, by 2030, Indonesia is also projected to control 62% of global nickel mining, and the Democratic Republic of Congo will account for 66% of cobalt mining, where they mine cobalt using child slave labor, and that's a fact. Many of these mines are directly financed by China, which was a point highlighted in a recent report compiled by Aid Data at the College of William and Mary. According to the report, between 2000 and 2021, Chinese financial institutions provided nearly $57 billion in loans to 19 low and middle income countries, including copper and cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo and Peru, and nickel from Indonesia. Not only does Chinese mineral dominance enable worldwide labor and human rights abuses, including child and forced labor, but it also gives the Communist country of China a stranglehold on America's economic and our national security. 2 months ago, China announced a ban of critical mineral exports to the United States to include antimony, gallium, germanium, and other dual-use minerals vital for both civilian and defense applications. China also has a long track record of strategically dumping its products onto global markets in order to stifle our attempts to build out secure mineral supply chains. And just this week, the CCP placed new export controls on 5 additional minerals that are key components in a range of industries, from energy development to cell phones to infrared missiles. Our reliance on foreign critical minerals is completely unacceptable. Yet, rather than heed the call of House Republicans to combat our nation's failure to secure domestic critical mineral supply chains, former President Biden chose to kneecap America by canceling decades-old mineral leases and withdrawing hundreds of thousands of mineral-rich acres in states like Minnesota, Arizona, and New Mexico, among others. But our self-inflicted wounds do not end there. A recent S&P Global study revealed that it takes an average of 29 years for a critical mineral project to progress from the discovery of the mineral to production in the United States. The only country in this world that takes longer to open up a mine is in Zambia. This absurd timeline is driven by high cost and uncertainty from permitting delays and the risk of litigation initiated by radical anti-mining groups. Fortunately, on the first day of his second term, President Trump signed an executive order titled Unleashing American Energy, which directs federal agencies to review and revise or revoke any agency actions that potentially burden the development of domestic energy sources, including critical and other hard rock minerals. This committee looks forward to working with the Trump administration to realize a golden age of American domestic critical mineral dominance. And I hope that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will join me today for a dynamic discussion about the importance of critical minerals to our economic and our national security, and how we can secure domestic critical mineral supply chains to propel us towards a brighter future. I want to thank the witnesses again for their willingness to testify today, and I look forward to hearing about how we can assure our national security by ensuring mineral security. And now I want to yield to my new ranking colleague, Representative Ansari, for her opening statement. And Representative, it's great to have you on this committee. You're going to do great work, and I look forward to our conversations. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair Stauber. It is great to join you. I'm thrilled to be here today, and I'm honored to serve as the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Energy and Mineral Resources this Congress. I look forward to working collaboratively and in a bipartisan way to get things done whenever possible. I was drawn to the Energy and Mineral Resources Subcommittee because we're handling issues that touch the daily lives of all of our constituents. When we in Congress make decisions about mining and energy development, it impacts everything from jobs to the cost of energy to the quality of the air that we breathe and the water that we drink. And of course, if we are addressing the climate crisis or making it worse. My constituents sent me to Washington, D.C. to fight for them, for clean air, clean water, lower prices, and safe places to live, work, and play. Arizonans know too well what it's like to live with the impacts of climate change. The communities I represent are on the front lines, facing unprecedented extreme heat and water scarcity. In fact, hundreds of Arizonans die every summer as a result of extreme heat. And this is driven by our dependence on polluting fossil fuels, which puts our well-being at the whims of big oil companies and their billionaire allies. This dependence must end. It won't be easy, but we can and we must transition to a clean energy economy. This transition relies on materials like copper, lithium, and cobalt to build the transition lines, batteries, solar panels, and wind turbines that we need. During my time on the Phoenix City Council, I served as a councilwoman and vice mayor of the city, fifth largest city in the country. I led the charge to electrify our city fleets, invest in renewable energy, and fast track the transition to clean electric vehicles. I did this to improve our air quality and public health while also knowing that it would require more mineral resources and advancements in our supply chain. Beyond clean energy, everything from the cell phones that we use to life-saving medical technologies rely on critical minerals. This is what we're here to talk about today, domestic mineral needs for national security. I agree with Chair Stauber. We should all be concerned that so many of our critical mineral supply chains rely on unfriendly or unreliable trading partners. And I agree that there is an opportunity to grow a modern, responsible, sustainable domestic mining industry that creates jobs and supports local economies. But mining is only part of the solution, and we need to make sure that it's done right. Mining on U.S. public lands is still governed by the mining law of 1872. It's not a surprise that a 150-year-old law that has never been reformed is not fit to handle modern challenges. The mining law has no specific environmental or public health protections, gives mining priority over all other uses of public lands, and doesn't require any royalties back to American taxpayers. If we did have a royalty, it could fund even more jobs by cleaning up the more than 100,000 abandoned hard rock mines across the West, including Arizona, and 500 abandoned uranium mines on the Navajo Nation. The mining law also contains no specific tribal consultation requirement, yet 89% of copper, 79% of lithium, 97% of nickel, and 68% of cobalt resources are within 35 miles of tribal land. And while the mining industry has changed a lot since 1872, it is still an incredibly resource-intensive process that creates mountains of toxic waste and uses trillions of gallons of water, which in the West is becoming an increasingly scarce and unreliable resource with climate change. In Arizona, loopholes in water laws allow mining companies to use groundwater without any restrictions, taking essential resources away from communities' scarce drinking water. Because of these issues, we need to look at national security and propose mines holistically, with a broad view of solutions on the table that will result in a stronger economy and more security for all Americans. If we all work together in good faith, we could manage many of these problems. Together, we could reform the mining law, get serious about acknowledging and planning for the environmental impacts of mines, and make sure mines pay the full cost of doing business while consulting sovereign tribal nations, ensuring communities have the water that they need and the clean air to breathe. And looking beyond mining, the federal government should work to support a circular economy, recycling the precious resources we already have so they don't end up in landfills. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how we can recapture and reuse minerals to fill gaps in our supply chains, making them more nimble, resilient, and environmentally friendly. Thank you again for being here, and I look forward to the discussion. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Ansari. I now will recognize the full committee chair, Representative Westerman, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Stauber and Ranking Member Ansari. And you know, this committee is going to address a lot of important issues in this Congress, but I'm not sure we will address one any more important than making America more productive when it comes to minerals and our resources. We have, again, a lot of good things that we can do together, and I hope that we can work together to address this issue of the shortages of these minerals and elements that we have here in our country. Our reliance on hard rock minerals for everything from transportation to communication to national security is no secret to any of us here today. These minerals are essential for things like cell phones, defense systems, and satellites. The fortunate part of it is that we're blessed here in America with some of the richest deposits of critical and hard rock minerals. A U.S. Geological Survey national map of currently identified potential critical mineral resources shows likely deposits in every single state. In my home state of Arkansas, for example, the brine from the Smackover Formation holds millions of tons of lithium reserves that will be vital to meet rising demands in the coming years. Yet for decades, we have allowed our capabilities to discover, extract, and process critical and other hard rock minerals to languish. Not only have we allowed refineries and processing facilities to shutter, but we've also suffocated key prospective mining operations with red tape. Worse yet, we failed to effectively combat the lawfare waged by some groups to determine further delay and devastate promising mining projects. Because of our inability to make efficient use of the critical minerals in our own borders, we've become increasingly reliant on importing these materials to meet our ever-growing needs. And because many of the nations upon which we rely, like China, are not allies, our mineral dependency presents a serious national security threat. I had a meeting just yesterday with an individual with a graphite deposit in New York, and if you look at the USGS list of how much graphite we use in America. I think it's 52,000 tons a year, and 100% of it is imported. Yet we have one single mine that I know of that could produce 10, 20, or 1,000 or more tons per year, but we've got to be able to get that graphite to market. It's disheartening to know how much of our economy and our security depends on these minerals and elements, and how much China and other countries are pulling the strings. And we see this happen when a new mine's announced in the U.S. Take the lithium, for instance, in my home state. What's China doing right now? They're dumping lithium in the world market to lower prices. This is not going to be easy. It's going to produce financial challenges for people trying to develop resources, and we've got to unite together as Americans to be able to use these things that we're blessed with to make the country better. So I'm looking forward to the testimony today and to the discussions that we have, and I hope we will all take this as a serious challenge to the future of our country on how we develop new mines, how we do it the most environmentally friendly way possible, how we recycle more things, how we use innovative technology. I had a chance to visit one of our national laboratories last summer, and I found that they're looking at ways to take copper, or not copper, but aluminum cable, and recycle that cable and use different technologies, and with the same amount of aluminum get 20% more conductivity through it. So when we talk about need for more transmission, we keep forgetting that we're always been the world leaders on innovation, and we can figure out how to use these resources better than anybody else in the world. We can also learn new ways to get these things out of the ground, to do it in a more environmentally friendly manner, and to do it in a way that obviously doesn't cause human rights violations like we see in some parts of the world. So again, I'm looking forward to not only this hearing, but the many hearings and markups that we'll have along the way, and I hope that we can work together to do something good for America. I yield back.
Thank you, Chair Westerman. I will now go to my colleague, the tennis co-caucus chair with me, and the ranking of the full committee, Representative Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good to be back with you. I want to congratulate our ranking member Ansari for her new position, and for the ranking member and the chairman for calling us together to discuss a really worthwhile topic. We can all agree that critical minerals are important for our national security and for the future, certainly of clean energy. The question before us is whether we're going to take a smart and strategic approach to address these issues, or fall for the false promise that we can simply dig our way out of this problem. And I have been on this committee now for 12 years. I assure you, I have seen every possible material, including sand and gravel, masquerading as a critical mineral that was essential to our national security. I've seen every mine in every location, including really special and sacred places, represented as critical to our national security. And in the last Congress, many of my colleagues across the aisle were saying, well, we've got to do all this new mining to support electric vehicles. Well, fast forward to now, you're trying to get rid of electric vehicles, but you still want to do the mining. So look, some of these mines we need. And we also need some other strategies to address our critical mineral needs. But some of these mines are solutions in search of a problem. And we've got to be thoughtful and careful enough to tell the difference. I worry about whether we are heading down that path of thoughtfulness and care, because President Trump, Elon Musk, and their allies here in Congress seem to believe that if we just let mining companies do whatever they want, wherever they want, the problem will fix itself, and that is nonsense. Our colleagues across the aisle blame common sense environmental protections and legal challenges for holding up mining projects. Well, folks, permitting exists to ensure that companies follow basic environmental and safety standards. Having access to the courts is essential because sometimes you have to protect a community's drinking water supply that's going to be unlawfully poisoned, or sometimes you got to protect sacred lands that are going to be desecrated or destroyed. The people affected in these situations should have a voice. They should have the right to seek justice through legal avenues. But even if we eliminated every permitting requirement tomorrow, we still would not have a secure, totally domestic supply of all the materials we need. According to USGS, we can't meet our needs with domestic reserves. This is not a problem that the United States can solve alone. But let's say we had every mineral that we wanted. Mining in America doesn't mean that these minerals stay here. And we need to talk about that too when we consider some of these controversial mining proposals. Most mining in the U.S. is done by massive multinational conglomerates that mine publicly owned minerals from our public lands and then turn around and sell them to the highest bidder, often shipping them overseas. And they do it without paying a cent back to the American taxpayer in royalties. Mining alone gets this special exemption. Every other use of public land, including oil and gas development, is required to return 16% of their profits back to the American people. So let's be clear. Foreign mining companies are taking America's resources for free, selling them to the highest bidder, often overseas, sometimes to geopolitical rivals, and leaving American communities to deal with the pollution and the destruction that they leave behind. And now you want to take away those last safeguards to protect our communities. Here's an example. Resolution Copper, a proposed mine in Arizona, would permanently destroy Oak Flat, a sacred site of the San Carlos Apache tribe. Resolution Copper is owned by two multinational, multi-billion-dollar conglomerates, Rio Tinto and BHP. The largest shareholder of Rio Tinto is a Chinese state-owned company. Resolution Copper has not committed to keeping the copper in the U.S. Most of what BHP and Rio Tinto mines ends up in China for processing. So that proposal would would bring no money to the U.S. taxpayers and would give away not only American public lands, but a sacred tribal site to a multinational CCP-owned company to mine copper that's just going to be sent abroad. It's a good example of the kind of giveaway that we need to scrutinize instead of exalting, which I see all too often in some of our deliberations here in this subcommittee. So I hope that we have an opportunity to work together to help separate the smart, strategic decisions that can actually make us safer, that can give us progress towards a reliable source of these materials without compromising other important values. And certainly Democrats are here to work with our Republican colleagues toward that end if we can. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. We will now move to introduce our witnesses. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the talk button on the microphone. We use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow. And at the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and we will ask you to please wrap up your statement. I will also allow all witnesses to testify before member questioning. Our first witness is Dr. Morgan Bazilian, and he is the director of the Payne Institute for Public Policy at the Colorado School of Mines, and he is stationed in Golden, Colorado. Doctor, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Chairman Stauber, Ranking Member Ansari, and members of the subcommittee, it's an honor to appear before you today on this important topic of critical minerals and national security. My name is Morgan Bazilian. I'm a professor and director of the Payne Institute for Public Policy at the Colorado School of Mines. I'm one of the world's leading scholars on the topics being discussed at today's hearing. The Colorado School of Mines has an extraordinary depth of knowledge on these topics and has been pursuing them for over 150 years. This area will benefit from both humility and a truly interdisciplinary approach, making trade-offs explicit and acknowledging that they change over time will help you make better policy. This is not a new topic, especially as it relates to security and war fighting. Historians, geologists, and government officials have long acknowledged the nexus between a state's mineral resources and its economic and military power. In 1902, historian Brooke Adams asserted that all experience has demonstrated that the center of mineral production is likely also to be the seat of empire. I believe strongly that the United States should urgently ramp up our domestic mining and refining operations in a manner that utilizes best technical and safety practices, has a focus on environment and community engagement, seeks transparency, and puts our nation in a strong position on global supply chains. This is in the economic and security interests of the country and will also support American workers and companies. There are positive developments from Arkansas to Arizona, from Nebraska to Nevada, from Minnesota to Montana that can become world-class mining assets, but many remain stymied. It's time to unlock this potential. The United States possesses a wealth of these minerals in the Earth's crust, on the ocean floor, and at the School of Mines, we study it even from the perspective of the moon and asteroids. There are also available as co-products and through recycling. The primary impetus for this hearing and related discussion stems from the Chinese dominance of the sector. And I'm using that term dominance not as rhetorical flourish, but one based on empirics. By 2022, China had assumed the top position in the production of 30 out of 50 minerals listed as critical by the USGS. This reliance exposes the United States to disruptions and economic pain, such as the recent export bans that China imposed on antimony, gallium, and germanium. Last year, colleagues and I correctly noted that moving forward, China could impose export controls on other minerals, like bismuth, rubidium, and tantalum. Much of this has now come to pass in the unproductive tit-for-tat between the United States and China. We largely ceded our leadership in the sector many decades ago to China, and they are not standing still. They are rather investing tens of billions of dollars all over the world today. Minerals are necessary for American national defense, economic prosperity, and energy security. Rare earth elements are used in Virginia-class attack submarines. Copper is used in 155mm artillery shells. Platinum group metals are used in catalytic converters, and gallium is used in advanced semiconductors. Tungsten is used in exploration drill bits. Copper is used in transmission lines and electric motors. In short, minerals are foundational across the modern economy and becoming more so. Strengthening U.S. mineral supply chains is an important area of bipartisan agreement, and this 119th Congress has a chance to take action. I give you 10 areas that require attention and prioritization. First, improved permitting and associated regulations. The existing national defense stockpile is insufficient for supporting the U.S. military in a major conflict. This needs to change, and quickly. Third, grow the workforce and support research. Fourth, restart the Bureau of Mines. Institutions are important to success. Fifth, provide well-focused financing, not just for supply, but also demand. Sixth, think in terms of supply chains, not just ore. Seventh, increase the viability and functioning of global markets. That will help investment decisions. Eighth, ensure that cutting-edge mining technologies and processes are deployed at scale. Ninth, engage meaningfully, early, and with respect for the sovereignty of Native American tribes and people. And lastly, work with allies globally. It's time for America to become an important mining country again. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Dr. Bazilian. I will now recognize my colleague, the gentleman from Arizona, Dr. Gosar, for 30 seconds to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce Jeremey Herald, the Chief Executive Officer of ClearPath. I'm excited to introduce Jeremey today as he's a proud alumni of my staff. From 2011 to 2013, Jeremey served as my legislative director before moving over to the United States Senate and then on to ClearPath. First as our policy director and then eventually moving up to the ranks of CEO. I'm proud to see a great Capitol Hill staffer succeed and join us here today on the other side of the dais. Welcome, Jeremey. I yield.
Thank you. Mr. Harrell, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Gosar, for the very kind introduction. It's great to be back here at the committee. Thank you, Ranking Member. Excited to discuss this important topic today. My name is Jeremey Harrell, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of ClearPath. Securing mineral supply chains is paramount to our nation's economic competitiveness. Global demand is rapidly increasing, and our nation's dependence on foreign supply chains is a significant risk to our national security. We often take for granted the materials in everyday consumer products and the clean energy that powers our nation. Estimates show the U.S. may need to double grid capacity over the coming decades to meet rising demand. Expanding this capacity requires substantial infrastructure that relies on various materials. The International Energy Agency predicts that by 2040, global demand for minerals like lithium, cobalt, graphite, and nickel could grow 20 to 40 times. Our nation needs a strategy that synchronizes U.S. R&D capabilities with targeted free market incentives, regulatory modernization, and proactive trade policies. That strategy should start with 3 key objectives. 1, restore predictability to the permitting process. 2, streamline judicial review of administrative actions. And 3, de-risk private investment in domestic mining and processing. First, predictability is essential. Never has the phrase "time is money" been more appropriate. A typical mining project loses more than 1/3 of its value because of permitting delays. Far too often, these delays make a project financially unviable. The energy and infrastructure projects most often impacted by this permitting purgatory offer the greatest benefits to our nation. Take the largest proven lithium reserve in the U.S., Nevada's Thacker Pass mine. Initial exploration began in 2007, but it didn't receive approval until 2021. Several permitting issues delayed the project, and it is now slated to begin production in 2028. 21 years later is simply unacceptable. The U.S. must eliminate unnecessary bureaucracy where the economic and environmental benefits outweigh the opportunity cost. The National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, has been contorted far beyond Congress's initial intent. NEPA is intended to be a procedural law that requires federal agencies to assess the environmental impact of their actions, not one that imposes new substantial requirements. The NEPA process is just the start to letting America build. Agencies ranging from the EPA to Interior need to also issue relevant permits, such as Endangered Species Act permits, Clean Water Act permits, and others before construction. New reforms should expedite the approval process for projects that bring net benefits and comply with laws to ensure clean water and clean air. This can be done faster without sacrificing environmental outcomes. Second, the judicial review of agency actions must be reformed. The current system is tilted towards those who seek to delay or block projects. It's simple. Once approved, legal challenges should be addressed, yet nearly every major mining project faces litigation that drags on for years. This results in years of delays that change little to nothing about the project. Litigants exploit these delays, aiming to stretch the process until developers run out of funding and ultimately abandon projects. Congress could consider limiting legal challenges to plain errors related to the natural resources laws, narrowing the scope, and setting strict review timelines. Without changes, our nation is needlessly undermining our own mineral supply chain goals. And third, the federal government could leverage its financial tools to de-risk private sector investment. Chinese state-owned enterprises use heavy subsidies to undercut American companies, distort prices, and dominate markets, leading to shortages of critical minerals and increased prices. Out-subsidizing China is not an effective strategy, but targeted incentives like the 45X tax credit, public-private partnerships, and low-cost debt financing can foster investment and protect American industries from unfair competition. The 45X tax credit could be strengthened to support U.S. production goals. The credit should provide meaningful incentives for domestic mines that send mineral concentrates to the U.S. or allied refineries, and it should allow domestic refiners to claim the credit. Leveraging these types of tools can accelerate new mines and processing facilities. These are just a few common sense reforms that Congress could consider to further American mineral security and manufacturing competitiveness. As global demand for minerals increases, the U.S. will either responsibly develop resources at home and alongside of our allies, or continue to rely on foreign sources, many of which pose human rights concerns, national security risks, and significant environmental consequences. ClearPath believes the U.S. should lead from the front. I look forward to working with this committee to push common sense reforms across the finish line. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Harrell. Our next witness is Dr. Dustin Mulvaney, and he is a professor of environmental studies at San Jose State University, and he is stationed in San Jose, California. Dr. Mulvaney, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you to the esteemed members of this committee. It's a great privilege to be here to speak before you today. I'm a professor of environmental studies, as was said, at San Jose State University, where I study supply chains, life cycle assessment, land use change, and recycling and waste impacts of energy technologies and infrastructures. Supply chain disruptions from bottlenecks, geographic concentration, and trade restrictions have shown vulnerabilities to the domestic economy and energy systems, and why securing adequate supplies are crucial to national security, economic prosperity, and safeguarding the planet we share. But there are a few important considerations I would like to raise in these opening remarks. One, mining's legacy of water contamination and waste warrants a more sustainable approach to mining and mineral extraction. New sites of mineral extraction cannot come at the expense of our wildlife, water-dependent ecosystems, and riparian habitats. Half of known critical mineral deposits in the U.S. are within trout and salmon habitat, and 1 in 10 deposits are in protected public land areas like wildernesses. Many critical minerals overlap with sage grouse habitat and big game wildlife corridors across the West. One lithium mine being proposed by an Australian mining company has potential impacts to an entire population of an endangered buckwheat plant that only exists in that particular spot. Most land-based critical minerals are located in areas already facing high or extreme high levels of water stress. 2, domestic critical minerals development should protect Native American sovereignty, self-determination, and provide meaningful consultation on cultural resources. It is not uncommon to hear that the federal consultation process for the National Historic Preservation Act, for example, is failing tribes on adequate and meaningful consultation. The United States should strengthen tribal consultation around ideas of self-determination and free, prior, and informed consent as described by the International Labor Organization's Convention 169. The Department of the Interior's new pre-plan coordination is a step in the right direction, bringing stakeholders together to understand others' priorities and concerns. Public policy should also encourage the United States to move away from the take, make, waste economy towards a circular economy. More progress is needed to move towards a circular economy. The U.S. lacks a comprehensive federal policy to encourage electronics and electrical equipment recovery and recycling. These are critical mineral resources in our hands that we let slip through our fingers. Analysts emphasize the need to develop new copper mines, for example, yet less than 40% of copper is currently recycled and the rest is landfilled. A circular economy approach means extracting more critical minerals from mine waste streams, end-of-life products, and reducing demand through resource efficiency and material substitution. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act directs the Secretary of Energy, in coordination with the Director of the National Science Foundation, to issue grants to support research on critical minerals, mining, recycling, reclamation strategies, and technologies. 4, undermining environmental laws will increase the time to build mines by making it harder for mine developers to obtain social license to operate. A social license to operate and trust is something gained through notification, consultation, listening, providing community benefits, and offering ownership, stake, etc. This becomes extremely difficult to do under circumstances such as fast tracking without substantial coordination. And no doubt there are idiosyncratic and frustrating situations in mine developments, but the reality is the time to take a permit, a hard rock mine, is closer to 2 years, according to the GAO, and where delays occur, they are overwhelmingly caused by the applicant. Predictability is often emphasized in describing environmental review of mining, but predictability is also important to environmental groups and tribes to know what land, water, and air is predictable. More predictability on all sides will help avoid the most intractable controversies. 5, the U.S. should build a modern critical minerals program around a modern mining law, not a 153-year-old law signed by Ulysses S. Grant. The 1872 law was intended for settlement of the American West. Without key reforms, this antiquated mining law will continue to cause unnecessary environmental degradation and environmental inequality. The mining law is a bad deal for U.S. taxpayers, as well as developers get these minerals royalty-free, sometimes being exported to other countries to be processed. These royalties also could be used to pay to finance some of the cleanup and remediation of legacy mine pollution. Finally, reshoring domestic supply chains while undermining incentives for electric vehicles sends mixed signals and is a recipe for contradictory outcomes. Developing critical mineral supplies would be strengthened by maintaining policies to encourage electric vehicles, including the Clean Car Rule and Inflation Reduction Act incentives. Uncertainty about the fate of these laws and policies sends signals to buyers that perhaps demand might not materialize. Certainty is crucial for major infrastructure investments, and mixed signals does not inspire certainty. In closing, we have a responsibility to steward the lands and waters where critical minerals will be extracted, and some places should be off limits to development. Responsible and sustainable mine development paired with efforts to close the loop in waste streams will be needed to meet critical mineral demands in coming decades. At the end of the day, critical minerals are exhaustible. Earth will not endlessly provide these natural resources. Thank you, and I look forward to a productive conversation.
Thank you for your testimony. Our final witness is Ms. Mckinsey Lyon, and she's the Vice President of External Affairs at Perpetua Resources, and she is based in Donnelly, Idaho. Ms. Lyon, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Stauber, Ranking Member Ansari, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Mckinsey Lyon. I am an Idahoan, and I am Vice President of External Affairs for Perpetua Resources. In the heart of central Idaho, the Stibnite Gold Project is designed to return to and to restore an abandoned mining site, to breathe economic vitality into our rural communities, to responsibly produce gold and provide the only domestically mined source of the critical mineral antimony. And it's actually the history of this site that I think is so relevant to our conversation today. Because on the eve of World War II, it was the blockade in the Pacific that meant the United States no longer had access to the antimony and the tungsten we needed. So the US government turned to Stibnite, Idaho, that then produced the majority of the antimony and tungsten used during the war effort. At the end of the war, the US Munitions Board then credited the men and women of Stibnite, Idaho, for having shortened World War II by a year, thus saving 1 million American lives. So the minerals in my backyard changed the course of history. But after World War II and the Korean War, our sources of antimony here domestically went offline. And once again, our industrial base became completely reliant on China for a source of antimony. Today, antimony has a huge array of commercial applications, from semiconductors to solar panels, lubricants, and fire retardant. The Department of Defense today uses a specific form of antimony called antimony trisulfide as a unique, non-replaceable component in over 300 types of ammunition. Despite antimony's importance in America's defense and manufacturing base, we are almost entirely dependent on non-allied nations. All told, China, Russia, and Tajikistan control 90% of global antimony, 80% of which goes through Chinese processing facilities. With this level of dominance in 2021, China was able to cut off America's sole supply of military-spec antimony trisulfide for the Department of Defense, wounding our defense readiness. Taking it further, just last year, the Chinese government struck our exposed Achilles heel, turning off and completely banning all antimony products being exported to the United States. And today, a once very little paid attention to supply chain is now unable to provide antimony. The good news is the Stibnite Gold Project is the nearest term solution to this urgent challenge. We hold a reserve of 148 million pounds of antimony, the only reserve of antimony identified in this country. And last month, we received our final record of decision from the US Forest Service. For us, 8 years of permitting came after 6 years of early community engagement and environmental planning. Getting to this point, however, represents a $400 million investment that includes up to $75 million in Defense Production Act funding and Army research funds. We need to begin our 3-year construction process this summer if we are going to produce antimony by 2028. However, we do still wait on one federal authorization. We also hope to utilize debt financing from the U.S. Export-Import Bank under the Make More in America program and the China Transformational Exports program. Our anticipated 18-year timeline from prospecting to production is just too long. Our nation can't wait 18 years to bring critical resources online, especially for vital technology, energy, and manufacturing needs that put our security and our economy at risk when China decides to turn off the tap. When we choose to control our critical minerals, we protect our future. I'm often reminded of a quote from Benjamin Franklin saying, "But for want of a nail, the kingdom fell." And critical minerals, while they may be sometimes obscure or used in small volumes, are our proverbial nail. They are the foundation of our economic, energy, and national security. And it's time to learn from our history. And it's time to bring back the American mining industry by choosing to bring responsible mining home. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Lyon. I want to thank all the witnesses for their testimony today. The chair will now recognize members for 5 minutes of questions, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Harrell, the Twin Metals Project in the 8th Congressional District of Minnesota that I represent, it stands to generate substantial economic benefits and create thousands of jobs. Unfortunately, the Biden administration sided with the anti-mining and anti-jobs activists and unilaterally blocked this project from moving forward, refusing to examine the science. How can Congress provide greater certainty for domestic mining projects and ensure that critical mineral development is not derailed by shifting political priorities?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question, and thank you for your leadership on these mining issues. I think really drives forward the need to restore some regulatory predictability. And the Twin Metals Project is a great example. The previous administration unilaterally took those lands out of play for consideration. We need to balance speed and safety. We need to do environmental analysis on these things, but when we've got an immense resource that is available here, it should be reviewed on its environmental merits, and we should ultimately get to a yes or no answer based on those merits. And so we've got to restore more predictability. We can't have the regulatory environment hopping back and forth between administrations and transitions.
Thank you very much. And I'll remind you that on that specific project, the former Secretary of Interior was asked by the Senate if there were critical minerals, why she shut that down. And she said, her words were, "I didn't think there were critical minerals in there. It's the biggest copper nickel find in the world." I'll just add that yesterday I reintroduced the Superior National Forest Restoration Act, which will reverse the Biden administration's actions to block this project and finally provide the legal and regulatory certainty for this important mine to move forward. This will prevent future anti-mining and administrations from shutting it down. Ms. Lyon, how large of a role will reclamation play in Perpetua's plan to develop the Stibnite Gold Project?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The vision of the Stibnite Gold Project was to go back to an abandoned mine site that had been mined for over a century and to use the resources of redevelopment to improve the environmental conditions. Today, 1 ton of arsenic leaches into the river every single year. We can improve that. We can improve water quality through mining, getting Meadow Creek at Stibnite down to a reduction of 90% of arsenic. So by looking at the challenges of Stibnite today, millions of tons of legacy tailings remain, water quality is impaired, the East Fork, South Fork of the Salmon River flows into an abandoned mining pit, and salmon are blocked from miles of habitat. Now, after 8 years of permitting, I can sit here and tell you that we will restore the site. We can improve water quality. We will improve and reconnect fish habitat so that once again, salmon can reach up to 20 miles of habitat, and overall be able to uplift the environmental conditions of Stibnite.
So it's safe to say that when all is said and done, you will leave the mine site in a better condition than it is today.
Yes, sir.
You know, you brought up the antimony in your testimony. I believe that the only reason at the 11th hour that the Biden administration approved your mine was because the Chinese Communist country decided not to export antimony, which they know we need. So by politics, they were forced. They weren't using the science and the facts. It was political in nature, yet we're here today. So before I yield, I want to ask a quick yes or no of each of our witnesses. Do you agree that domestic mineral extraction and production using the American workers, the American environmental standards, and the American labor standards is superior to overseas mining operations? Dr. Bazilian? You have the, can you turn on your mic?
Thank you very much.
There you go.
Yes, in general, the standards in the United States are superior to many other countries, not all countries.
Thank you. Mr. Harrell?
Yes, that's why U.S. leadership is so important.
Mr. Mulvaney?
I would echo Dr. Bazilian.
Ms. Lyon?
Yes, I will always bet on the American miner.
Thank you very much. I will now yield to the ranking member representative. Oh. All right. Okay, sorry. I will now yield to the ranker of the full committee, Mr. Huffman from California, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the witnesses. So we've been talking about the mining law of 1872, a law that was codified to reflect gold rush era values when we wanted to incentivize mining on public lands and promote settlement of the West. Of course, this ancient law, this anachronistic law, holds no regard for the values that we have today. Things like environmental responsibility and respect for indigenous sovereignty and treaty rights. So relying on this ancient law from 1872 to guide a modern, responsible domestic mining industry, all the things we say we want to do today, is a little bit like asking President Ulysses S. Grant to come back and regulate artificial intelligence. It's tough to do. The mining law prioritizes mining over everything else on our public lands, does nothing to protect the environment or to direct consultation with tribes who are disproportionately impacted often by mining projects. And on top of all this, mining corporations are not expected to pay anything in royalties for using our federal land. They can hold on to mining claims for as little as $10 per acre per year. So Dr. Mulvaney, we say we want to evolve into a modern, responsible, sustainable mining industry to meet these challenges. That's a pretty generous framework from that 1872 law. Do you know of any other industries that enjoy sweetheart terms like that?
No, in fact, on private lands or in state lands, for example, in Utah, there are much higher royalties paid to the state of Utah on adjacent properties that would be mined on the federal side. Oil and gas industries pay 16.67%, I believe, for their leases. A solar development's going to pay somewhere between $1,000 and $5,000 an acre for public lands on an annual basis to lease that. So it is a pretty good deal, I would say, for mining companies, including multinational companies that have no base here in the United States.
Yeah, I'm just surprised because we say that we're looking for savings. We're looking to address the deficit and the debt. Elon Musk and his tech bro fake public officials are rummaging through databases and crashing through the doors of federal agencies and trying to break things in search of efficiency and savings, but they haven't found their way to this 1872 law, and I'm just wondering why that would be. I mean, if hard rock mining paid the same royalties as just oil and gas, what would that do to the U.S. Treasury? Yeah.
Well, I think when we think about the legacy contamination from mining industries, you could use those revenues to help clean up and restore sites. So that's something that would otherwise come out of taxpayer pockets. So,
but if they paid the same royalties as oil and gas, we're talking about hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars
yes,
into the United States Treasury, right? At a time when we say we're really looking under every sofa cushion for that kind of savings. So I am hoping, Elon and your tech bros, if you're listening, maybe find your way to the 1872 mining law and take a look at that instead of rummaging through our most sensitive personal taxpayer records and all other things that you really shouldn't have your hands on. Dr. Mulvaney, can you explain the environmental consequences of a mad rush to a mining free-for-all rather than a measured, thoughtful approach? What happens when you do it that way?
Well, what could happen is if you approve a bunch of mines hastily and they're all competing with each other, you might end up with a couple of bankrupt mines that start to develop sites and don't actually produce anything before they go bankrupt. So it does take a measured response to figuring out which mines to develop, because every proposed mine shouldn't be developed. We should be we should screen for impacts to tribes and environmental impacts and really try to choose the least conflicted sites that are also productive.
Thank you. And Dr. Bazilian, you at the Colorado School of Mines are doing a lot of important research into these areas, trying to help us find the right strategies, the right mix of technologies and minerals. And I just want to ask you about the funding that Colorado School of Mines receives from the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, both of which are in the crosshairs right now of President Trump. He's issued executive orders purporting to freeze funding and has said he wants to claw it back. My understanding is programs like the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office funding have really been important to the research and the good work that you and your colleagues are doing. Can you tell us what this uncertainty means for your university and the critical mineral supply chains work that you're doing more broadly?
Thank you, Congressman. I'm afraid I don't have that data for you. I'm not aware of the quantum nor the details of the funding we get from those specific mechanisms.
Yeah. You might want to take a look at that. And with that, I'll yield
Thank you.
back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Very much. The Chair will now recognize Representative Whitman for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. I want to focus on what's happening with China. As you know, they are laser focused on critical minerals and rare earth elements, and we know that they've just now issued their third round of export controls. Exporters are now required to get CCP approval for a list of minerals now including tungsten, tellurium, bismuth, indium, molybdenum, and the list continues to grow. This is the third round of growing that list. And last week, the International Trade Commission told us what we already know, and that is China is doing everything they can to prevent an American graphite industry from emerging. Again, unfair trade practices, we see that. We also know, too, that they own 100% of the world's source of gallium, 98% of the world's source of germanium. They're using that for both their strategic and economic advantage. We know by the U.S. Geological Survey and their modeling that this could create up to a $3.4 billion hole in our GDP by these unfair trade practices. That's why I'm very honored to lead the Critical Minerals Working Group for the Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. This is a priority for our nation to get back into not just the mining business, but also the refining and smelting business, because China is also looking to dominate in those areas. So I'd like to go to our witnesses, and Mr. Harrell, I'll start with you. Can you give me your thoughts about the things that we can do to combat these unfair trade practices? I have a number of bills that we're putting in to try to create some structure there for U.S. producers and for U.S. consumers, especially in critical national security industries, to make sure there's an assured and reliable source of these critical minerals and rare earth elements, and make sure, too, that they are operating within a free market, not in a government-restricted place that China wants the world market to operate within.
Thank you, Congressman, for the question, and thank you for your leadership on this critical minerals issue and national security issues as a whole. You're underscoring a critical vulnerability here, and if I had to oversimplify kind of 3 key points that I think we have to do, we're competing globally on price, and we struggle because of some of the labor issues with some of our competitors, Chinese subsidies and foreign subsidies. So I would say we need to innovate here. We need to find ways to ultimately do these mining processes in a lower cost way and in a more environmentally sustainable way. We need to drive down the cost of those mechanisms. We need to use innovative financing tools, not to out-subsidize China, because we're never going to win that fight, but to catalyze some of these early investments in processing and in the infrastructure that we need. And then 3, we need to use the world-class innovators here in the United States to ultimately make products that aren't going to need some of these things as well. We need to innovate on batteries and energy storage that use earth-abundant resources, because in the end, there's a wide variety of defense applications that we're going to need these critical minerals.
Very good. Dr. Mulvaney, go to you and just get your perspective. How do we combat these unfair trade practices? How does the United States create and sustain an industry that includes extraction, refining, and smelting?
Well, I think one of the reasons that China is able to compete is because they've had sustained partnership between their government and those developments. So we probably need to strengthen partnerships with OEMs, for example, to make sure that automakers are also investing in mines, or defense industries are also investing in mines. And for that to happen, we need to have a stable policy environment and send signals to the market that we are planning on developing certain resources.
Very good. Thank you. I want to emphasize, too, that by the United States buying minerals from these mines, remember, 16 of the 18 mines in Africa are owned by China. They used forced labor, and they destroy the environment. So for us to sanctimoniously say that we're for all these things, and yet we buy and we enable the Chinese to exploit human beings and destroy the environment is unbelievably unacceptable for the United States to do that. Ms. Lyon, let's get your perspective in the last 30 seconds.
Absolutely, Congressman, and thank you. We need long-term strategy that enables the left hand of government to understand what the right hand needs. We also need to reconfirm on the short-term tools that we can utilize as an industry today to be competitive against that $57 billion China is using to support, while it takes us 29 years to get to the finish line. Those resources include things that helped us, like Title III of the Defense Production Act, or the U.S. EXIM Import Bank's China and Transformational Export Programs. We need these programs today to be sustained in order to move forward.
Thank you, Ms. Lyon. Mr. Chairman, are you back?
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes the ranking member of this committee, Representative Ansari, for 5 minutes.
Thank you all very much for the informative testimony. As we've discussed, mining can be part of the solution to our mineral needs, but it won't be the only solution. Recycling and reuse can help reduce the demand for mined materials and can make our supply chains more adaptive to demand, which with technology, as we know, is always changing. So my first question is for Dr. Mulvaney. Could you give us a ballpark for the quantity of minerals we're losing to landfills each year compared to the amount of minerals that we take out of the ground?
Yeah, and there's not a lot of studies of how much gets diverted into landfills, because it's not something we track. Obviously, it's, everybody's putting stuff into their garbage. But one study that's frequently cited by the USGS from 2004 found that in the United States, about 1.1 million tons of copper are landfilled annually, and that matches roughly about with how much is extracted in the United States on an annual basis. That's just copper. Other materials would have to be looked at. We don't have a lot of information, partly. I mean, think about cell phones, right? People stockpile cell phones in their closets and drawers and things like that. So everything that doesn't always make it into the landfill right away, but that's roughly the numbers that I could have.
Thank you. And how much can recycling contribute to our mineral needs if systems are set up properly and products are actually designed to be recycled at the end of their lives?
The metals that I'm most familiar with are the ones in batteries, and I see nickel, cobalt, manganese numbers in the 10 to 20 to 30% amount. It requires, I think, having recycled content standards. So in Europe, they have recycled content standards for batteries, and that requires that purchasers of batteries are buying materials that have some recovered content. You have to send signals to waste industries to build the equipment to recover the materials, and having strong recycling laws is one way to do that.
And on that, can you talk about a little bit about the challenges that we face to get there and how the federal government could possibly support these efforts?
Yeah, well, in Europe, they have a comprehensive waste recovery law, and we do not have a federal policy like that. We leave electronic waste. We regulate hazardous waste. We don't regulate all electrical equipment, and we leave e-waste management, which is where we're going to find a lot of these metals, to the states. And then we end up with a patchwork of laws that are a little different in every state. So I think, working through the federal government to make sure those laws are harmonized would be one pathway to ensuring that we have a robust and resilient recycling infrastructure.
Thank you. I'd also like to talk a little bit about water use. As I mentioned, communities in my district are on the front lines of the climate crisis, particularly when it comes to extreme heat and drought. They are an example of how access to clean water resources is just as important to security as anything else. In Phoenix, we've been able to reduce water demand even as our population and our economy have boomed, but we need long-term solutions, and all of the industries in the West need to be developed with these scarce water resources in mind. In Arizona, loopholes exempt mining from water use laws, and unfortunately, we're already hearing of examples of mines in places like our neighbors in Nevada that are running groundwater aquifers dry. So my question, and this is also to you, Dr. Mulvaney, I know you've done research on lithium mining and its impact on water resources in particular. Can you tell us more about the ways that we can improve water use in mining?
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, so I'll submit for the record a paper we just published on lithium and water impacts across the life cycle. We have different new technologies emerging, direct lithium extraction, for example. There's still questions around what the water use looks like for that, but that is possibly a new generation of lithium extraction technologies where we might be able to pull minerals from brines. The Salton Sea is an area where I've been closely working with groups in the Lithium Valley. But also just ensuring that mine development doesn't have impacts on groundwater. I think through the Thacker Pass controversy, we saw a result that led to a mine that was ultimately developed that had less impact on groundwater than it was initially proposed. So having strong environmental review and looking at groundwater impacts in that review is one way that we can ensure that mines are developed appropriately.
Thank you so much. Yield back.
Thank you, Representative Ansari. Chair now recognizes Representative Gosar from the great state of Arizona for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a representative of Arizona, the Copper State, this hearing brings home this whole issue. Mineral security is national security. Thankfully, President Trump understands the importance of domestic mineral production. For example, his Unleashing American Energy executive order calls on agency heads to identify actions that will impose undue burdens on the mining and processing of non-fuel minerals. Ending such burdens on mining is crucial to unlocking our domestic production potential. When we make mining great again, we hope to ensure our country does not rely on our adversaries or countries with unacceptable environmental or labor conditions for important mineral necessity for energy and computers. Mineral security is also economic security. President Trump recognizes this and signed an executive order calling for the creation of a sovereign wealth fund. Tying natural assets, including minerals, to the economic security of American people is a wonderful idea. In fact, my legislation, H.R. 34, the Lasso Act, gives the president this legislative format to achieve just this. I look forward to seeing what President Trump and this Congress can do to ensure mineral dominance for Americans. Mr. Harrell, you have firsthand knowledge of the mining aspects in Arizona. Can you talk to us about the Biden's abuse of the Antiquities Act to create a 1.6 million acre national monument adjacent to the Grand Canyon to restrict uranium mining and economic development in our state, but also posing risks to the national security interests of our country at large?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Gissar. Yes, again, as we're talking about these unilateral withdrawals that are done administratively in millions of acres, like certainly that tool was envisioned to be used for very small areas, right? And it's been abused over years by, frankly, Republican and Democratic administrations. In the end, we want to balance speed and safety on environmental reviews, but we want everyone to be given a fair shake here. And so we have acute uranium production needs. There's global consensus that we're going to need to as much as 3x nuclear to meet energy and climate goals. U.S. innovators are leading forward, and we are significantly reliant on Russian nuclear fuel products. And so we should be mining it here, we should be enriching it here, and we should ultimately be fabricating fuel in this country. And so we need to evaluate these sites by a case-by-case basis, see if they merit a yes or a no. And sometimes we will ultimately land on no, but this system far too often is a default no.
So let me ask you a quick question. Understanding the extraction of uranium may take some education again, because you have these breccia pipes up in northern Arizona that are very concentrated. They're also a sunken, collapsed matrix. My dad was a geologist from Colorado School of Mines, so I used to hate rocks. Now I love rocks. But what it basically does is every time it rains, every time it blows, you get exposure to these breccia pipes. So, but when you take them out, they're very concentric. They're about 20 to 40 acres. They take out that breccia pipe, and a lot of times they have these caliche clays that are forming these subsurface barriers for water permeation. So what you're actually getting is increased permeation, and you're getting rid of the long-standing exposure. Would you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, I've toured multiple of these sites across this in the United States, including in northern Arizona, and they use very innovative processes to remove this in an environmental sustainable way, and you can do it in a way that protects and maybe even improves risks to groundwater impact.
So you're also familiar with resolution copper. Now, who's right on this? You know, the San Carlos say that this is their traditional religious grounds, but yet you have a tribal historian who has no purview to anything else other than the records, saying this was never a religious area. What gives here?
Congress is right. In 2014, legislation was signed into law due to your leadership and this committee's leadership to enact a land exchange to enable this project moving forward. It was signed into law by President Obama, and we are still over 10 years later debating and driving towards a 2030 production date. This project has been evaluated extensively, and it's been yo-yoed back and forth based off political transitions and positions.
How many mining companies do you think could actually afford the $2 billion plus they've put into reclaiming that mine site there in Superior?
Very few, and Resolution has taken, I've been at that site 5+ times. They have submitted a significant long-term plan on how they're going to reclaim that site, produce what is one of the largest copper reserves in the entire world, could meet 25% of our domestic demand, and revitalize a community that is in the heart of copper country, close to significant mining infrastructure, and ultimately deliver results that I think would be good for our national security, good for the Arizona economy, good for the national economy.
Okay, I got one last question. Sorry about this one, but it's very quick. All of you, can you tell me why our Constitution is antiquated at almost 250 years of age? Is it antiquated, Dr. Brazil?
Sorry, Congressman, you mean the
U.S. Constitution.
The Constitution.
It's almost 250 years old. We're going to celebrate that very quickly in the next 2 years. Is it antiquated?
Geez, Congressman, I'm not a specialist on
Mr. Harrell?
constitutional law, sorry.
I think we uphold the Constitution.
Yeah. How about you, Doctor?
I'm going to echo Dr. Bazilian again.
This is an easy one, Dr. Lynn.
And I am not an expert, but sir, there are elements of our Constitution that we are here to uphold.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gosar. The chair now recognizes Representative Rivas from the great state of California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Stauber and Ranking Member Ansari. One of my biggest priorities in Congress, I'm a new member from California, is environmental justice, elevating communities that often don't have a voice in our federal government. My district is in Los Angeles, in the San Fernando Valley. It's an area that has unfortunately had a lot of environmental injustices impacted our communities in the past due to, and present, due to, poor land use decisions by all levels of government. And it's kind of the genesis for me to fight for these issues and to be that voice on Natural Resources Committee. And I did that as a state legislator in California, and I will continue to do that here in Congress. We're talking about developing a modern mining industry in our country, and I strongly urge our colleagues to consider environmental justice and decision-making, especially for tribal communities. Mining has a long and well-documented history of committing environmental and human rights injustices across the globe, including in the United States, especially for Indigenous people. Now, I know the mining industry is different than it was back then, years ago, but unfortunately, our mining laws have not changed, and Indigenous communities will continue to bear the brunt of expanded mining without major reforms. So my question is for Dr. Mulvaney, considering this history of hard rock mining and negative effects on environmental tribal lands, what policies or actions do you recommend Congress take to rebuild our relationships with tribes and address a clean energy future?
Very briefly, strengthening consultation, early consultation is a key strategy for that. And the most recent pre-planning initiative from the Department of Interior that came out in November or December last year, I think is a step in the right direction. That's where people could understand when a site is sacred and maybe a site shouldn't be developed. We had a project down in Southern California, a gold mine that the Quetzan thought was on it doesn't matter how sustainable your mining practices if it's on a site that somebody wants or thinks is wilderness or is a sacred site. And through the process of thinking through that mine, they ended up not building that mine. That mine has been is no longer going to be developed, and nice to know that it's not competing against a more sustainable gold mine somewhere else in the United States. So I think that's an area that we could strengthen. Prior consultation early.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that insight, and as we look forward to building this economy, thank you. I yield back my time.
I think the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Fulcher, is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's great to have an Idahoan on the panel today. Mckinsey, thank you for being here and for your hard work in advancing the permitting process for the stibnite mine in Idaho. Did I understand correctly that that was an 18-year process from start to finish?
Congressman, yes, it was.
18 years, and Mr. Chairman, I was going to point out that that probably meant that Congressman Huffman was still in grade school during that process, but he's not here to hear me say that, so I guess I won't point it out. Anyway, the Stibnite Mine Project is the only source of mined antimony in the United States, critical for defense, energy storage, and technology. And I'm a visual learner, and so thanks to our friends at Stibnite, this is what it looks like, Mr. Chairman. It's this is the pre-processed form, but this is an example of what we're going after and what is so critical here. The project is even more critical as China, which currently dominates global antimony production, has increasingly restricted exports of this mineral, further highlighting the need for domestic supply. So I'm proud that Perpetua in Idaho is leading the way in securing this resource for our nation. In fact, Idaho resources play a key role in securing our nation's future, and I'll continue to advocate for responsible mining projects like Stibnite that bring lasting benefits to our state and country. So with that, I want to get to a question for Ms. Lyon, but China banned the export of antimony just this Tuesday, and they've expanded their export controls over additional forms of tungsten and other critical minerals. So I was just going to ask Ms. Lyon, if I understand the history correctly, there was some tungsten activity in this project once upon a time. Can you talk about the possibility of restarting that resource extraction at the Stibnite project?
Absolutely, and Congressman, thank you for the support of our project. Historically, as I mentioned, stibnite produced 90% of the antimony and 50% of the tungsten used in World War II. As we look at redeveloping the site, we've been able to identify, we know we have 148 million pounds of antimony remaining. We know that because it's a byproduct of gold production. We are also fairly confident, and we see in our mineralization existing tungsten, but we have not gone back to fully flush out the full mineral resource that could be remaining at stibnite today. But we're always happy to do that investigation and continue to have Idaho help play a role in our national security.
Great, thank you for that. A question for Mr. Bazilian, and this has to do with the various lists of critical minerals. But the Wall Street Journal reported earlier this week, China has added 5 additional critical minerals subject to export restrictions. Tungsten is one. Tellurium, bismuth, molybdenum, and indium are others. This follows the ban on gallium and germanium exports just in December. And so these are all essential for electronics, the energy sector, national defense. The U.S. Geological Survey identifies non-fuel minerals vital to our economy and national security, yet agencies like the Department of Energy and Defense Logistics also maintain separate lists for energy and defense. Is there an opportunity for some better coordination there, Mr. Bazilian?
Thank you very much, Congressman. Yeah, I think it's an important question. It's a little bit wonky for politics typically, but the way we calculate mineral criticality, we have 3 unclassified lists in the United States, one from the USGS, one from the Department of Energy, and one through the Department of Defense. Only the Department of Defense list includes not just ores, but chemicals and materials, and that's an important way we can help refine the other lists. And the other innovation that DoD does is that they look forward. The other lists are snapshots of a current point in time. I'll just add that the way the United States calculates mineral criticality is not dissimilar to some other jurisdictions like European Union or a recent UK list, but it's fundamentally different than how Canada and Australia looks at mineral criticality. So I think there's considerable more sophistication that could be brought to these calculations, and it would help inform decisions.
Great, thank you for that. Very moving quickly because I'm about out of time. Mr. Harrell, just a quick comment for you having to do with judicial review, and I'll abbreviate the question by saying, can some judicial review reform help prevent unnecessary litigation that delays these projects for like 18 years, as Ms. Lyon was talking about? Is there opportunities there?
Absolutely. I think it's one of the single largest opportunities here. We want to ensure that communities have a chance to use the legal system, but the way it's structured today, it's being completely abused and ultimately is a major source of these significant decades-long delays.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I got a lot more questions, but I will submit those in writing because I'm out of time. I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Fulcher. The chair now recognizes Mr. Magaziner from Rhode Island for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and the witnesses today all agree on the importance of securing critical mineral supply chains. And Mr. Bazilian, you mentioned in your testimony that, quote, working with allies will be an indispensable part of our success in creating robust, secure, and resilient supply chains. This is an absolutely vital point. The United States must maintain good relationships, particularly with the developing world, so that we can access the critical minerals that we need to grow America's economy and maintain a high standard of living. This is one of the many reasons why it is wrong and self-defeating for Donald Trump and Elon Musk to be shredding our relationships with mineral-rich countries around the world, particularly the developing world. Here are the facts. Less than 1% of all cobalt reserves are in the United States. Cobalt, of course, is used to make batteries and cell phones, laptops, and cars. More than 50% of the world's cobalt is in Africa. The world's largest copper reserves are in South America. The United States has only 0.1% of the world's nickel reserves. Nickel, of course, used primarily to make steel. Indonesia and Brazil have nearly half of the world's nickel. Rare earth minerals are used in semiconductors and advanced medical equipment and consumer electronics. The U.S. has less than 1% of the world's rare earth mineral reserves. And in order to have a stable supply, we need strong relationships with countries like India and Brazil and Tanzania and South Africa. So we need these relationships. But what have Donald Trump and Elon Musk done over the last 2 weeks? They have shut down USAID, our most important agency for building goodwill in the developing world. All across the developing world right now, people are waking up to see their health clinics shut down, access to medicine for their children cut off, access to food cut off, American-supported infrastructure projects canceled, all because Donald Trump and the richest man in the world are illegally and stupidly shredding our relationships with the very countries we need as partners to access these minerals. To say nothing of the cruelty of the richest man in the world gleefully taking food away from hungry children and medicine away from the sick, but that's another story. And guess who's stepping in, ready to save the day? China. China's Belt and Road Initiative, our greatest competitor, China, will be happy to step into the void that Trump and Musk are creating, but China's help will come with a price. So congratulations, Donald and Elon, in the global race to secure rare earth minerals, most of which are in the developing world. You have surrendered the battlefield to our greatest adversary. And of course, there is another big country with vast reserves of critical minerals that I haven't mentioned yet. In fact, it is the country that today the U.S. imports the most minerals from, Canada. Canada, which the stable genius has decided to start a trade war with. Aluminum, copper, cobalt, graphite, and more. Canada has become a vital supply of these critical minerals to the United States. Now, don't worry, Donald Trump only wants to tax these critical minerals at 10% at the border instead of 25%. Mexico also supplies critical minerals, by the way. Now, look, I know we're here today to talk about domestic mining, and that is important, and it is a good conversation to have. But the fact remains that the vast majority of reserves of critical minerals lie outside the United States, and no amount of domestic mining can change that. So Donald Trump and Elon Musk need to stop doing everything that they can to make it harder for us to access those minerals and easier for our adversaries to do so. Dr. Mulvaney, does the U.S. have enough critical mineral reserves that we don't need to rely on partnerships with other countries?
No.
And are other countries going to be more likely to give us access to critical minerals when we are pulling food and medicine and other assistance away from them?
I can't speak to that necessarily, but your intimation sounds like it might be right.
And is it wise for us to be posing new taxes on the importation of critical minerals from places like Canada and Mexico?
Tariffs in general are not very helpful for American consumers.
All right, I just want everyone to keep in mind the context that we're operating in here. Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes the full committee chair, Representative Westerman.
Thank you, Chairman Stauber, and again, thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Dr. Bazilian, my undergraduate degrees in engineering, and Dr. Mulvaney, my graduate degrees in forestry, which was kind of the original environmental studies, so I feel a little bit of kinship here, but also probably think in a different way than a lot of people because I like to make things into outlines and categorize stuff and go to work on it, kind of the engineering method of solving a problem. So as I look at America's mineral future, if I was going to say, here are the goals that I have for America's mineral future, I wrote 3 of them down. Reduce dependence on Chinese and other adversarial suppliers. The next one would be attract investments in domestic mining, refining, recycling, and manufacturing. And the third big goal would be to lead the world in conservation, innovation, workers' health and safety, and so on. So that would be like my big goals for America's mining future. But then, going through that kind of scientific method, I'd say, okay, what are the specific objectives to achieve those 3 main goals? And maybe we could add more to the goals or debate what they should be, but the one objective I see that addresses all 3 of those things would be to streamline our existing permitting process, to promote rapid development of mining, refining, recycling, and manufacturing of domestic minerals, and to do that in a way that doesn't wipe out environmental sideboards, but actually incorporates maybe new ways to make those environmental sideboards better. Now, I've got a lot of other ideas, but what I want to hear are your ideas on what other specific objectives should we put on the list, because at some point, somebody's got to write a piece of legislation and try to get it passed through the House and through the Senate and get it on the president's desk. Dr. Bazilian, what would be your, what specific objectives should we work towards?
I think your objectives make a lot of sense, Congressman. You know, as some other colleagues have said here, it's very important to look at trade-offs and be explicit about the costs and benefits and the impacts. So I think keeping that in mind is an important one. Certainly, reducing our import dependence is important, but at the same time, I think the other side of the coin there is ensuring that our portfolio of partners across supply chains is robust and resilient, and that's very important.
So maybe like a Western Hemisphere Alliance or Western Civilization Alliance, where we work with our partners who maybe have a lot of these resources in more abundance than we do, to make sure that we have strong supply chains.
I think that's important. You know, when we think about our allies in this, the first department that recognizes the need to work with allies is the Department of Defense. And so I think under the first Trump presidency, we had something called ERGI, the Energy Resource Governance Initiative at the State Department, that was meant to do exactly what you just said. Under the Biden administration, it morphed into something called the Mineral Security Partnership. And I imagine both of those are not dissimilar.
So I want to get input from the other panelists. Yeah. You can go, Mr. Harrell.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you sum it up there well. Four key things. How do we invest in mine and process more here in the U.S.? How do we maximize the resources we have here today? So reuse and recycling. How do we innovate on the products that need these materials? And then fourth, how do we partner with allies? Because there are inherently limitations of what's under our feet.
Mr. Mulvaney.
That sounds like a great list. I'll add a small, piece here, which is characterizing some of our waste resources. So one of the things I understand that precludes us from developing tailings, for example, mine sites, is just not understanding what's there. So having federal support to try to characterize what's at waste sites, what's at reclaimed,
So
potentially
more
reclaimed mines.
research and development on.
Yeah, or just characterization of what resources we actually have.
All right. Ms. Lyon.
Chairman, I think in the long term, our experience is that our projects are complicated. We have 12 state and federal environmental agencies around the table in the permitting process for the Stibnite Gold Project. We need a forum by which those agencies can come together and not just identify problems, but find solutions. Commerce, State, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Energy also need to be able to be at that table to signal strategic need in balancing the environmental interests of this country as well.
That would all fall under streamlining permitting.
Yes, sir.
All right. If you'll bear with me 1 second, Mr. Chair, I heard former Secretary Zinke, our colleague, he made an analogy of a salmon and a trout swimming up a river that's regulated by the salmon by NOAA, the trout by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, with a forest managed by the Forest Service and other land managed by the BLM on a river that's got a Corps of Engineers dam and maybe a Bureau of Reclamation. And you start looking at all of the overlap, it's amazing we're able to get anything done. So I think that's got to be an important part of streamlining. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes Representative Stansberry for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, both our Mr. Chairmans, and also our new ranking member. It's wonderful to be here today. Thank you all so much for being here. I was just reviewing your testimony. I'm sorry I wasn't here in person at the beginning of it. As some of you may know, I actually used to work at the Office of Management and Budget, and I did the budget for USGS, and I was actually part of the interagency team within the Executive Office of the President that convened for many years to try to untangle the critical minerals supply chain issues. And so I appreciate the comments that were just made. We'd need an all of the above, coordinated strategy across all of our federal agencies, working with the private sector, working with tribes and environmental groups. Unfortunately, what we see often happen here in Congress is these issues get highly politicized and then deployed for the purpose of supporting an ad hoc piece of legislation here, an ad hoc piece of legislation there. And so I do think for the purposes of this hearing, and I know many of you have touched on this in your testimony, it's important that this not just become a conversation to drive legislation that's just going to, provide unfettered access to sensitive lands and completely undermine our environmental laws. Looking at the testimony, both for Mr. Bazilian as well as Mr. Mulvaney, Dr. Mulvaney, I apologize, doctors. What I'm struck by reading both of your testimonies, which I think is fully concurrent with the work that's been done for many years in this sector, is number one, identifying, there's just a basic geologic reality about the Earth's crust, which is that we need hundreds of different minerals, and they are not all in the United States. In fact, some of the largest supplies of critical minerals are in Central Asia, they're in Africa. They just don't exist here on the North American continent, but they've become very important to the supply chain and to manufacturing in the United States. And so to that point, which I think Mr. Magaziner was touching on, we will have to continue to engage in international relationships. Europe is also very much struggling with these issues, especially since China has been stockpiling minerals that are not only on the Asian continent, but also, using their diplomatic pressures to buy up mines throughout the world and to, create partnerships. So we had to be conscious that part of the solution here is actually diplomatic. And so it is true that we have to continue to have diplomatic relationships with these countries. And the undermining of international affairs that folks may not realize is that part of how we have diplomatic relationships with other parts of the world is that we provide aid to them. And that's actually important to the critical supply chain. But that's only one piece of the equation. We do need to increase domestic mining, but only in places where it's appropriate, where the minerals actually can be mined in a safe manner, where it's not going to actually destroy the aquifer, and in places that are not going to undermine tribal sovereignty and sacred cultural places. And, there are a number of really important places that have been set aside, especially during the last administration. And I know, Mr. Chairman, we will very much disagree on this because I know you're very passionate about this, but there are places like the Boundary Waters, like Resolution Copper's desire to mine in a tribal sacred site that is for thousands of years been a place where the Apache people have gone for ceremonies that, yes, there may be great geologic deposits there. Yes, they may be able to provide for supply chain certainty for the United States, but there are other reasons and other values that we have about these places that make it such that we don't want to mine there. And I think that we have to not lose sight of that, because once you especially have like a vast surface mining operation, it will never be the same again. So we have to be really thoughtful about how we approach this issue and not undermine tribal sovereignty, not undermine, the sacred places that are important to our communities. and to do it in a smart and really coordinated manner. So I'm short on time, but I think I just wanted to say that I appreciate you all coming in here, and I hope that this testimony is not used as a foil to undermine environmental laws and tribal sovereignty. So thank you.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Representative Tiffany for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, we just heard the strategy from the other side. Not in my backyard. Get it someplace else. That's what we're going to do here in the United States of America. What a strategy for national security, for economic security, for job security. Dr. Mulvaney.
Mr. Tiffany, would you
Name
yield?
a location or two, one or two, where we
Mr.
should build a
Tiffany.
mine in the United States
Would
of
the
America.
Would the gentleman yield?
Gentleman, stop, ma'am.
No, I'm not going to yield. I only got 5 minutes, Mr. Chairman. That's all you're giving me.
Go ahead, Representative Tiffany.
Dr. Mulvaney, where could we build a mine in the United States right now in your mind? Where could we build one real soon?
Choosing a site for a mine is a complicated and very place-based process. So I hesitate to say because I don't want to speak for other communities.
So
I lived next to a mine for 10 years. a
Sure,
sand
thank
mine.
you. Thank you for that
So,
answer.
I'm-
So we had the former head of the U.S. Forest Service here, Mr. Chairman, just a couple years ago, and he was fighting the project up in northern Minnesota, and I posed the same question to him. He said, well, we can't do it near water, we can't do it. And I said, well, how about Resolution Copper in Arizona, someplace where it's dry? Well, I don't know about that either. Where can we build a mine here in the United States of America? Give me a deposit. Name an example right now, Dr. Mulvaney.
We've permitted a bunch of mines in the last year in Nevada. So we are not in my backyard is not happening everywhere. So I understand that there are, and I've learned through this committee from previous testimony, the boundary waters and the Resolution Copper projects are extremely contentious. I would say they're very unique in terms of their issues.
I'm going to change course here a little bit. You cite the 1872 law and you say it's a disaster and we should get to the modern era, Ulysses S. Grant and all the rest. Don't all the states have modern mining laws? Are you familiar with Wisconsin's mining law that I rewrote in a decade ago?
No, I am not, but the 1872 law governs mining on public lands specifically. So state law doesn't supersede the federal law in those cases.
So if you built a mine on federal land in the state of Wisconsin, wouldn't you also have to comply with the state requirements?
I think we've heard many times there are many agencies at multiple levels involved in all of these things, and that's what makes them
exactly
complicated.
right. And isn't it a red herring on your part to cite this 1872 law when you know very well there are modern mining laws that have been passed in states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, that there are modern mining laws that are in place that are protective of the public? Don't you think it's a bit duplicitous to not give some context and say, yes, but there are other requirements in place? Ms. Lyon, I suspect Idaho's got a comprehensive mining law, am I correct?
Yes, and we are still subject to the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, and financial assurance.
You cited the sage grouse habitat, Dr. Mulvaney. There's a massive solar site going up in central Wisconsin that conservationists are concerned about as a result of the grouse. Should they be building that massive solar site there when you have conservationists that are very concerned about it?
I will ask a student whose dissertation committee I'm on, who's studying an area right around Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin student. So I will ask them and put it in the record. But solar farms are also controversial, and they face the same issues. If the landscape is sacred, if it's important, it's going to face the same kind of opposition.
So, Mr. Chairman, the term was just used, solar farms. They are not farms. They are industrial sites. They are producing electricity. Anyone that uses the term farm, that is incorrect. They're not growing anything unless you say electricity is growing. Are you familiar with the Ivanpah project in California?
Yes, I camped on that site before it was built. I've studied that site for 15 years.
What just happened to the Ivanpah project?
So first of all, the Ivanpah project is a concentrated solar farm that also burns natural gas. It burns so much natural gas that it has to participate in California's cap and trade program.
Is the Ivanpah project, is it operating currently?
That project has always had problems. That project was.
Is it correct, Dr. Mulvaney, that the project went broke?
The project,
How
I'm
many,
not sure it went broke.
How many billions of dollars went from
They
the
didn't-
American taxpayer to the Avampa project?
If I recall, it's in my book, Solar Power, $1.8 billion or so.
Unfortunately, my time has run out. Yes, it failed.
I would love to talk more at some point,
I'd
Mr.
ask
Tiffany.
unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to introduce into the record, net zero is a non-starter without more minerals and better permitting. Sarah Montalbano.
Without objection.
And I yield back.
I'd like to ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record this fact sheet from the Biden-Harris administration on critical minerals that outlines the important investments they made and that through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. One thing we can all do to advance critical minerals is to acknowledge the Article 1 constitutional authority of Congress and get these investments flowing again.
Without objection. The chair now recognizes Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield 20
Thank
seconds
you.
at least to the
Yield a
chairman.
couple seconds. I just want to remind the committee that there was a couple years ago in this Natural Resources Committee where my colleagues on the other side of the aisle had a witness and talked about why we couldn't mine in northern Minnesota and why we couldn't mine in Arizona. She said it was too wet in Arizona, or too wet in Minnesota rather, too wet in Minnesota and too dry in Arizona. I asked the same question of her. Where should we mine? And she said the quiet part out loud in this committee, and she says nowhere. Representative Collins, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, gosh, I got so many notes over here, I don't really know where I want to start. But I do want to say it's nice to see that there is a common theme this morning of national security and economic growth through mining. And Mr. Chairman, as a sophomore up here, I want to say that one of the best things that ever happened was the field hearings that we had. I actually went to Duluth, Minnesota. I was up there at the mine. Saw people sitting across from me that, Ms. Lyon, you're exactly right. The best of the best. They were worried to death about the next generation and what they were going to do because they couldn't get that mine permitted. As a matter of fact, a federal piece of property couldn't get mined, but you could get, they were mining on the state property. It really didn't make any sense to me. Went to Arizona, saw where, man, some of the most skillful mining operations that there are today. Impressive. It's amazing what technology does and what we do in the United States. And Ms. Lyon, I'm just like you. I would never bet against America. We are the best. We are the best country in the world. We are the biggest on the block, and there is no problem we saying I am proud to be America first, and we should all be America first. I just want to go through a few things that I know. Matter of fact, China, and I heard it even with our ranking member talking about China process. Of course, China's processing everything. The majority of our critical minerals are processed by China. Why? Because we're down to 3 smelters here in the United States. And we have to send over 80% of what we do process in the United States to China so that they can process it and send it back here from what we are mining. And that's because I think that in a lot of ways we're our own worst enemy. We create our problems through the federal government and the federal bureaucracy that has continued to interfere in all industries. But Mr. Harrell, in the short time that I have, I heard you say when Mr. Whitman was asking you a few questions, pricing. Pricing is an issue. It's an issue. And I read your testimony, and I just want you to expand a little bit on maybe judicial review and how that plays a part in pricing and what happens to mines when judicial review and the time frame it takes to get a mine up and going.
Absolutely. Thank you, Congressman Collins, and for your leadership on these issues. Effectively, the regulatory process in many cases can cut 1/3 of the value of a mining project here. And so that uncertainty, time is money. And so we've got to find a way to balance speed and safety, but get to yes or no on these answers, reviewing quickly. And I think the judicial process draws this out particularly long in multiple ways. One, the process itself is long. The amount of time in which people can object to projects, the amount of time it takes the judicial system to review these projects, in other parts of that area. The other part is so many of our federal agencies are trying to litigate proof their environmental analysis. That's how we're getting these thousands of pages of documents that are starting to evaluate things that are not even in the scope of a project or far beyond what Congress ever intended, because they're putting together environmental impact statements to try to make it litigation proof.
Would you say that a number of these litigation problems, to put it lightly, come from frivolous lawsuits from environmentalists?
They're one stakeholder that plays a significant role in suing to try to block projects.
I would agree 100%. Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, I got to comment on how we talk about our tribal lands and our Native American tribes. I find it rich that we just had a hearing here less than a year ago with tribal communities talking about how drug trafficking, crime, and how they need help from the American people and from our law enforcement to help keep them safe. And we failed them at that. But then we just had a hearing where the Navajo want to do their own mining, but we had an environmentalist sitting next to him talking about how they're suing them so that they can't mine on their own property when these people want to be economically independent and take care of themselves. But yet we sit here and we say, we're going to take care of you on one side, we fail you, but then we say you're not able to mine on your own property and take care of your own people? That's kind of hypocritical. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Welcome to my world.
Thank you very much. Before I go on to Representative Hageman, I do want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the following reports. It's a May 23rd report commissioned by the Biden administration's Department of Labor titled Forced Labor in Cobalt Mining in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where they admit there's child forced labor. The next thing I'd like to request to be placed into the record by unanimous consent is a letter from the North American Building Trades where they support the expansive benefits of domestic mining and the impediment caused by our permitting system. And then the American Experiment talks about their absolute support for mining in Minnesota. And then the Institute for Energy Research, the economic and strategic importance of domestic mineral production, supporting domestic mining in this country. Without objection, so moved, and I will recognize Representative Hageman from Wyoming for 5 minutes.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Congratulations on your chairmanship. We look forward to your leadership over the next 2 years. Wyoming is the largest coal producer in the nation, and what I want to say to everyone is, you're welcome. We keep the lights on, and we heat your homes. We do a beautiful job of it, and I invite everyone on this committee to come to Wyoming and tour our mines. And I can assure you, you will be impressed. In talking about our native populations, the Navajo tribe is the owner of one of our largest coal mines. And it is important that we keep those operations in place and that we, in fact, expand them. Coal is the energy of the future. It is not the energy of the past. And the hysteria over global warming and climate change is not improving our environment. It's making us poor. It is creating more energy poverty and is making us weaker on a national and international stage. Ms. Lyon, you stated in your testimony that a 2-decade timeline from prospecting to production is far too long for critical minerals. And I agree with you, because Wyoming is also home to many critical minerals. The permitting process for new mines in the U.S. is overly cumbersome, unnecessarily complex, and makes resource development uncompetitive with other countries. How would you propose to streamline this process so that critical mineral projects like Bear Lodge Rare Earth Project in Wyoming can help to secure and domesticate this critical supply chain?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for your question. As I have mentioned, we need long-term solutions and short-term tools. Those long-term tools or solutions include permitting reform and streamlining that will help our agencies work together rather than work against each other. And all of those voices need to be at the table. We need timelines that we can count on. And we need some judicial review reform in order to ensure that after a $400 million investment, We know we have a permit we can act on, and we can get these minerals out of the ground after we have earned the right and the ability to do so.
Certainty and stability seem to be two of the most important issues that you're describing there. In the 118th Congress, we passed Senate File 2228, which exempted semiconductor projects from NEPA, even though the mining industries which produce the minerals and fuels needed to produce the chips enjoy no such exemption. Do you think only exempting certain industries when widespread permitting reform is needed is wise national policy making?
No, ma'am.
I don't either. That's why I introduced H.R. 676, which uses the same approach as Senate File 2228, but for minerals and fuels. In order to sustain our grid, ensure national security, and support industries such as the semiconductor industry, do you think legislation such as this is needed?
While I am not familiar with the specific legislation, semiconductors to all technologies are absolutely required for our national security and our energy future to produce the energy we need as a country.
Energy security is national security. I think it's that simple.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
regardless of what it is that we are producing, whether it is oil and gas or uranium, phosphorus, potash, whatever it may be, it is absolutely critical for our food supply chain, our energy supply chain, and making sure that we can maintain the same standard of living that we have right now. Isn't that true?
Absolutely, ma'am. Our energy resources are also reliant on an infrastructure behind it to get it onto the grid that uses all of the minerals that you can think of.
Yes. Uranium plays a critical role in our energy and national security, supporting 20% of the electrical grid, our nuclear navy, nuclear deterrence, and other defense applications and life-saving medical applications as well. In 2018, the U.S. Geological Survey, or USGS, included uranium on its inaugural critical minerals list. In 2022, the Biden administration improperly removed uranium from its updated list with no consideration given to the underlying merits. This decision puts uranium at a disadvantage in the federal permitting process and critical minerals programs and is counterproductive to our legislative achievements over the past 2 years. Mr. Bazilian, how is the intent of the Prohibiting Russian Uranium Imports Act and Nuclear Fuel Security Act being undermined by the exclusion of uranium on the USGS critical mineral list and the DOE critical mineral list?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Uranium is terribly important to the United States. It's also important to Native American lands, as you know. We import lots of our uranium from Canada, our closest neighbor, of course, Kazakhstan as well, but Canada is an important part of that supply chain. I would also note that very recently there's finally been a deal to transport uranium across the Navajo Nation, and part of that deal includes helping clean up and the possibility with new technologies of getting new uranium from those resources. So I think having it as top of mind is very important.
Do you think it should be on the critical minerals list?
The current critical minerals list of USGS needs to be refined in many ways.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Before I go to Representative Ezell, in my opening statement, I mentioned that it took, on average, 29 years to open a mine, and there were some concerns and about whether that was accurate or not. I want, for the record, I'm going to now submit the S&P Global report that specifically says it takes an average of 29 years for a critical mineral project to progress from the discovery of the mineral to production in the United States. I wanted to clear that up if anybody had any concerns. And I ask unanimous consent to enter it into the record. Without objection, Representative Ezell, you're up for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your leadership. I want to give 30 seconds to Dr. Gosar, just 30 seconds.
Thank you so very much. First of all, I'd like to talk about patents. I think this is very interesting for this aspect because in 2010, or 2011, we went from first to discover to first to file. and that's been very problematic. I want to bring up, for example, Dr. Brazil, are you familiar with the new Schlumberger lithium concentration process?
Roughly, yes.
Okay, so this is going to be something revolutionary, because now what we've turned in is real usable water, because lithium concentrations take a lot of water, and they're actually cleaning it at the same time they're actually producing it. So I think this is a whole nother realm we haven't even talked about. Last but not least, what percentage of our critical minerals are recycled, sir, doctor?
Very little. It's 5% rare earths, 0 gallium, 0 germanium. So now, tellurium, if we, solar panel, the First Solar uses 40% of the tellurium supply, and they're able to recycle their panels and recover 95% of that. And that's partly because of a condition for entering the European Union market 15 years ago, where they required it because they had cadmium also in the solar panel. So,
well, I'm a big recycler, so we need to really put that in place. Thanks. I yield back to the gentleman.
Thank you. America's future depends on critical minerals, which are essential to our military, economy, and national security. We've all talked about that this morning. Yet we remain dangerously dependent on foreign adversaries like China. While it takes us nearly 30 years to open a mine due to bureaucratic red tape, radical environmental litigation, China is rapidly expanding its control over global mineral supply chains. This is a direct threat to our national security. We have the resources, workforce, technology to mine and process these critical minerals right here at home. One example is in my home state of Mississippi, Gulfport, Mississippi. Chemours is the world's largest producer of titanium dioxide through the chloride process. China also produces this product, but uses a less efficient and more dangerous method. The process is so valuable that the Chinese attempted to steal it. But IP theft is not only our only challenge. Just remember this, the Chinese are not our friends. China's economic aggression is being aided by the failed Biden policies and decades of regulatory overreach. Thankfully, President Trump signed an executive order on the first day in office and cut the red tape to restore American mineral independence. It's time to unleash domestic mining, put America, not China, in control of our future. I look forward to all this committee will accomplish in partnership with the administration. Dr. Bazilian, you also cite the importance of the President's EO, as I mentioned earlier. As you know, palladium is essential for the U.S. auto industry, yet the industry's reliance is largely dependent on South Africa and Russia. How might our dependence on these foreign suppliers impact our supply of vehicles for the market?
Thank you, Congressman. Just starting with your first point, today in the United States, we produce 162 mining engineering students per year in the entire country, and China produces roughly 20 times that. Mm-hmm. So in terms of innovation of technologies, processes, and mining, they are far ahead in the talent pool, which underlies everything else, including your question about vehicles. I think that we're going to need to think not in terms of ores, as I've said, but across the supply chains from the upstream supply of the ores all the way down to the vehicles you assess in order to make good decisions.
Thank you. We know our military depends on critical minerals, materials for everything from fighter jets to missile defense systems. You mentioned this in your testimony, sir, but you can expand on the most immediate national security risk from the dependence and what steps should Congress take right now to mitigate these risks?
Thank you, sir. I have briefed most of the combatant commands on this issue, and they're all taken with it for different reasons, the regional combatant commands. Mm-hmm. And as we speak, over the last, from 6 months ago to 6 months in the future, there will be on the order of 10 tabletop war game exercises looking at optimization for their specific needs. And I think as long as what we need to do is take the system boundary of everything and focus it in on the specific needs of those military applications first, and then move out.
Thank you. Mr. Harrell, even when U.S. companies try to compete, China actively manipulates global markets to drive them out of business. Who would have ever dreamed that that could go on right here in America? We saw this with cobalt when Chinese-backed production in the Congo drove prices so low that the only cobalt mine in the U.S. had to shut down. This is blatant economic warfare, and we're allowing this to happen. How can the U.S. counter these practices by the Chinese?
Yeah, these are global commodities, and so the Chinese are using their subsidies and tools, and many of our competitors are doing it to impact the marketplace, right? And so it does mean that we need to find ways to enable development here. We need to work with partners. Nuclear fuel is a great example where kind of five leading nations that are involved in the nuclear world made a joint commitment at the G7 last year that they're going to wane off Russian fuel products. Then this Congress, or the previous Congress, passed the Russian fuel import limitation. We're not going to be able to do this alone in the global marketplace, and so we need to leverage those allies closely.
If I may have one more. Ms. Lyons, thank you for telling us about these years and years of delays, and thank you for all you've done. Let's continue to bring this to light, these delays that are causing us to fall in behind. And so thank you all for being here today and providing us with this good information. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman from Mississippi. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Crank, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being a little bit late. I, at the same time, had a classified briefing over on the House Armed Services Committee where I serve on the threat from China. So we won't be talking about any of that here today, but clearly there are continuing threats that we're talking about in this committee as well. The United States conceded dominance of the mineral markets to China, and we're paying a price for it, economically, environmentally, with labor norms, and with our national security. It's evident in all of the witness testimony before us that China has the ability, at the flip of a switch, to ban the export of key minerals or processing technologies, or dump minerals on the market, to prevent us from reclaiming a domestic market. And so, to put it simply, China has no intention of relinquishing its chokehold on any part of the mineral supply chain. And rather than taking a proactive and thoughtful and strategic approach to minerals, the past 4 years, the Biden administration stifled domestic mineral production, issuing public lands withdrawals or vacated leases to stop energy and mineral production on federal lands. They issued a report on mining reforms that lacked any substantial ideas to improve the permitting timelines or projects. And they botched the implementation of Fiscal Responsibility Act NEPA reforms that were intended to make the permitting process predictable. So it appears that only when it was necessary or an existential threat to national security or their climate agenda did the Biden administration take any positive action on domestic mining. Mr. Harrell, I completely agree that the U.S. needs a better domestic strategy, not only for our economic prosperity, but also for our national security. However, China has a global strategy to retain mineral dominance. So what actions globally should the U.S. be considering to reassert dominance in the minerals market?
Thank you, Congressman Crank, and it's a great question. It's an important piece of the puzzle. We have to do things here at home, and there's global moves that we need to make. These bilateral, multilateral agreements with partners that jointly try to wane off the Chinese dominance in this realm, I think, are going to be really important. We need to use tools in the tool belt that we have here in the U.S., things that are going to come before this Congress in the next 2 years. The Development Finance Corporation's reauthorization will be coming up here soon. That's one tool in the tool belt where we can help finance projects abroad as well that can support our mineral needs. I think as Ms. Lyons referenced, the Export-Import Bank of the United States, that's up for reauthorization in 2026. Another important tool to catalyze and promote U.S. technology and infrastructure here in this country if we use it the right way. So we have to use those tools in our tool belt. We're never going to out-subsidize China, so we need to use these innovative free market financing tools that the U.S. has at its disposal to really compete.
Yeah, they're waging economic war against us, and we had a hearing, subcommittee hearing, and another subcommittee of this committee And we talked about cables and, how we just tie ourselves up with environmental regulations. And the Chinese just laugh. They must be laughing at us, the way that we do this to ourselves. Dr. Bazilian, you mentioned in your testimony, it may not be realistic for the U.S. to catch up to China. Are there more formal frameworks between the U.S. and its allies that we should be looking at to create an alternative mineral market?
Thank you, Congressman. So I'll repeat what I said, that China is producing roughly 20 times the experts in the area that we are today. They're investing tens of billions of dollars, and not just domestically, but all over the world. That's not diplomacy, that's actual investment in projects that the countries want. We also have to improve markets for these goods. Without transparent markets with decent price discovery, it is incredibly difficult for domestic companies to go to their board and make a financial decision to invest. We should focus on military needs very specifically, and the war games I just mentioned, the 10 or so war games going on, are an important input into your decision-making. And finally, going back, working with allies across this is incredibly important, but diplomacy is slow. And so we had ERGI under the first Trump administration, we have MSP under Biden, and what you do in this Congress will make a big difference in the outcomes.
Thank you. I yield back 1 second, Mr. Chairman.
I think the gentleman from Colorado. The gentleman from Alaska, Mr. Begich, is recognized for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to start with a statement. It's incredible to me to see some of my colleagues in Congress and their amazing faith in government. It just blows my mind sometimes. The faith is so great, in fact, that there are some colleagues in this body who believe that Congress can pass laws that will change the weather. An incredible amount of faith. I don't have that much faith in government, but I do have some questions for those who are here today. Alaska has nearly every critical mineral on the critical minerals list and has those minerals in economic quantities. And we heard statements to the contrary today, but I'd just like to counter that point and say Alaska is the answer to so many of our critical mineral challenges. One of the challenges that we've heard discussed at length today is regulatory overburden. Well, we've just got too many laws, too many agencies, too much nexus on the books, and when you've got a mine time that takes 29 years from the time you discover a mine until the time you can actually actively mine that resource, China's doing this in 12, 18, 24 months, and we have got to do everything we can do to streamline that process. I call this regulatory arbitrage, where other jurisdictions, other nations have made mining a critical priority, whereas we have done apparently everything we can do in this body and across other bodies in the nation to stymie mineral development. So my question first to Dr. Bazilian, what frameworks would you recommend to address this regulatory arbitrage that seems to exist?
Thank you, Congressman. One of the first things we need to do to get to financial decisions here, even with economically viable resources, is to improve markets and improve the transparency, the price discovery, the liquidity of those markets. Today, if I ask anyone in this august chamber to tell me the price of crude oil in Dubai, you can do it in 10 seconds, as can your children. If you try to do that for graphite, it'll take you all day, and you'll still get the answer wrong, and it might be traded in yuan. So the fundamental need to improve these markets helps everything else on this supply chain. So that's at least one answer to your question.
Thank you. So let me now turn to Mr. Harrell. The hearing memo references the USGS CML and the need to republish it every 3 years, which will take place this year. The most recent list only included 50 minerals as critical, with a definition of being essential to economic and national security of the United States, produced from a supply chain vulnerable to disruption and serving an essential function in the manufacturing of a product. It is astounding that copper, gold, and silver are not currently included, and I will be pushing for their inclusion this year. In my mind, critical minerals are important and hard to get. Copper is critical for electrification, and its exclusion is more than a gross oversight, it is gross negligence in my view. Aside from ensuring our agencies publish lists of minerals we actually need and must be able to have access to, are there other areas that you believe Congress should focus on to ensure development and production of all minerals that society needs can become a reality?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Congressman, and no doubt we need to modernize these lists and figure out how we're better prioritizing the production of these things. Copper, one of the top areas where we need it for aerospace, defense technologies, clean energy technologies, nuclear power, energy storage. I mean, we need it for literally almost everything in our everyday lives. The lists are really about like access to certain programs to drive forward and invest in our domestic capacity. And so, you know, I think we absolutely need to modernize these lists, but ultimately we need a comprehensive strategy that is using these tools where we innovate, where we try to foster more private sector finance in this space. How do we direct investments here? And so if we look at this comprehensively, we try to restore some regulatory predictability, and we can support U.S. industry because we are not fighting on a level playing field in the global realm. I think we can make immense progress here, but it's going to be a long fight, right? Like, we're not going to rein back China has 80% effectively in aggregate of global processing capacity. It's going to take a while, but we need to start now.
Thank you. And if I may, just for a moment, make the statement, you know, we've heard a lot about the importance of critical minerals and mining generally for national security. It's also critical for restoring domestic supply chains. We can mine things here, but we've got to be able to smelt and refine those products here in order to move them through to a manufactured state, a finished state. One of the things that we see is even when we do mine successfully in the United States, oftentimes those minerals are sent to jurisdictions like China. The next time we see those minerals is in an iPhone, and we've missed out on all that economic activity domestically. That's something we need to change, and in order to change it, we've got to make sure that we are encouraging the next step in mineral processing, which is smelting and refining. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hunt, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, witnesses, for being here. On November the 5th, 2024, the American people spoke. The American people answered the question of what they want the future to look like. The American people want the United States to control its own destiny and not rely on hostile nations. That is why domestic mineral production and processing is so important. China dominates the mineral supply chain, controlling approximately 60% of global production and an estimated 90% of processing. We must mine in the United States and grow our processing capacity and manufacturing base, and that's exactly how you make America great again. If you've ever spoken to my dear friend, Mr. Stauber, he'd immediately tell you that the largest cobalt find in the world is in his home state of Minnesota. In fact, he'll probably lead with that before he gave you his own name. We must be able to access our domestic resources to stave off our adversaries. Another way is through the collection of polymetric nodules, and these potato-sized rocks are full of cobalt, copper, iron, manganese, nickel, zinc, and rare earth minerals. These minerals are found in the Cook Islands and in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone right off the coast of Hawaii. Because the CCZ is governed by the United Nations, I am once again introducing a resolution encouraging the United Nations to issue rules and regulations related to the CCZ. These regulations will allow American companies working with friendly countries to collect these minerals responsibly, denying China yet another opportunity to strangle another facet of the mineral supply chain in the entire world. I encourage my Democrat colleagues to consider my resolution and support Mr. Stauber's legislation and help thwart China's domination of the minerals that our country and the world so dearly needs. Thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I yield back the remainder of my time to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Hurd, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Thank you to the witnesses for bearing with us in these questions.
Dr. Bazilian mentioned that critical mineral security and success are, in your words, intimately tied to Indian country. And also Dr. Mulvaney in his testimony addresses the issue of tribal and community engagement. These things are near and dear to me as the chairman of the Indian and Insular Affairs Subcommittee here on Natural Resources. My question, though, is to you, Ms. Lyon. Can you tell me what Perpetua has done on this front to thoughtfully engage tribes and other communities around the Stibnite project?
Yes, Congressman, thank you for the question. It started with our vision that we could go back to an abandoned mine site, improve water quality, improve salmon habitat, and overall restore the degraded resources available at this site. And then we put that into action through listening. So early engagement with our tribal communities helped us understand many of the needs and interests held by our tribes in Idaho. It then included action. So we have now invested $19 million right now in going and cleaning up a legacy for a mess we didn't make to help improve those resources today. We've made a number of changes to our mine plan to accommodate it. But it's not just our early action. The US government has also upheld their trust obligation through government-to-government consultation. And through the last 8 years, and then in the culmination of our final record of decision, mandated tribal access through Stibnite, tribal observation, and tribal monitoring plans.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Lyon. And quick follow-up question to you. You mentioned that this project is designed to repair environmental legacies left behind from mining activities that occurred more than 100 years ago. I know that you haven't been able to move even a single shovel of dirt yet, but can you talk about what this Stibnite project looks like now from an environmental standpoint, and what effect would this project have on that site from an environmental standpoint?
Congressman, thank you for the question again. Today, Stibnite is a mess. It's seen over 100 years of mining activity off and on before it was abandoned. So there are no solutions to the fact that 1 ton of arsenic leaches into the river. There are no solutions to the fact that 20 miles of fish habitat are blocked, except for our project, which was designed specifically to take on those legacies and improve them through mining. So we know we can improve water quality. We know we can open access to salmon habitat. And even the U.S. Forest Service found that we will have a long-term benefit to the salmon accessing Stibnite.
So, Ms. Lyon, is it fair to say that the Stibnite mining project would leave the environment better than it is right now?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Dr. Bazilian, quick question. Can you help me understand the difference between the phrase critical minerals and rare earth minerals? What's the difference between those? Just help with basic terminology there.
Yes, rare earths are a group of 17 minerals, and so they are a subset of the wider critical minerals list, at least in the United States.
Okay. That's helpful, thank you. So it's different. There's one is a subset of the other then. Got it.
Yes, sir.
One thing that I wanted to ask you and also Dr. Harrell about are the need to not just mine these minerals, but the processing whereby we can make the minerals capable of being used. Can you talk a little bit about that and the importance of doing that here domestically as well?
Yes, sir. It's, as I've said, it's very important to think of this area in terms of the full supply chain. And how it works is that mining ore brings less value add to an economy than producing advanced manufacturing. So that's the first thing. And the second is that refining is one step in that, and then it needs to lead to advanced manufacturing in order to get the best financial returns for companies as well as jobs for our people. And I'll just end, Congressman Hurd, by noting that I think it's very important your work with Native American tribes, and that the focus should be not only on sovereignty and listening, but on creating vibrant economies.
Thank you, Dr. Harrell, anything else on the processing component of this?
I would just add, again, we're competing on price here, and so in the end, more steps that involve having to export this product or move it around or take it out of our borders does add significant cost, right? So to the extent that it is feasible, we should be trying to do as much as possible here if we want that product to ultimately contribute to our domestic challenges.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I just want to make a statement. We heard the last three speakers talk about the collection concentration process. And I think this is something we overlook because these are typically in urban or rural areas. And these are good paying mine jobs, incredible to the economy of the rural America. And we're coming up with some great ideas of what's coming because with copper comes other different metals that you can actually get and collect. And that's why I brought up the one with Schlumberger. This technology is growing rapidly, as you have said, Doctor. And it's one of those things that we really need to keep advantage of. Now, we may not have all the rare earths in the world, but we have critical amounts of those in some of those areas that you can then parlay. It's called leverage. And we can have our clean air, clean water all the way at the same time. So from that standpoint, I want to thank the witnesses for your valuable contribution today and your techniques. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond with those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee may submit these questions to the committee clerk by 5 p.m. on Tuesday, February 11th. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there's no further business, without objection, this committee stands adjourned.